Are you ready for the shocking truth? What if I told you that behind the facades of the glittering mansions of the Gilded Age lay not only balls and diamonds, but also daily exhausting fear that turned the lives of hundreds of thousands of people into a living hell? The outward prosperity and incredible luxury of that time came at a price, and it was usually paid by the most invisible but most numerous inhabitants of these palaces, the domestic servants. Their fates, broken by a single careless word or an incorrectly placed napkin, were hidden behind thick walls, but the pain and humiliation were very real. Watch the video to the end to learn how a single word or a sudden outburst of anger from an all-powerful master could instantly end a career, destroy a reputation, and ruin the life of a servant in the late Victorian era. I will reveal the best-kept secret. Unlike the maids in sentimental novels, the real life of servants in the mansions of New York and London was filled with endless pressure and a total lack of personal freedom. Servants were not just a labor force, they were an extension of their employer's social status, their living property, and any stain on their reputation automatically cast a shadow on the family they served. That is why their existence was governed by strict rules, a rigid hierarchy, and a constant readiness for the worst, which made even simple everyday life a challenge. They lived in conditions where their personal time, rest, and even sleep were completely subject to the schedule and sudden whims of their masters, and their own lives began only after midnight when all the lights in the ceremonial halls went out. The main feature of this period was that wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of a small circle of magnates who, having no aristocratic roots, sought to establish their status through an outward display of luxury. Huge mansions known as cottages or dashas required countless servants, and the more servants there were, the higher the status of the family was considered to be. Large houses could employ between 20 and 50 people, each of whom had their own narrow, strictly regulated function, and their professionalism was measured not only by their ability to work, but also by their absolute invisibility. From the housekeeper to the junior valet, they all existed in a strict vertical hierarchy, where the orders of the senior servants were no less severe than those of the masters. This internal hierarchy created additional tension, as junior servants often suffered from the despotism of their superiors, who, in turn, tried to relieve the stress accumulated from communicating with their masters on their subordinates. It was because of this two-tiered system of authority that the life of a servant was a constant attempt to please everyone at once and not fall foul of anyone. The working day began long before dawn and ended late at night, and servants often had to perform physically exhausting work that was hidden from the eyes of guests and the public. Lifting heavy buckets of coal, cleaning dozens of fireplaces, hand-washing huge amounts of laundry, polishing silver and crystal, and endless trips up and down the stairs. All this formed the invisible foundation of Victorian glamour. At the same time, they had to look impeccable at all times, and the slightest stain on their uniform or disheveled hairstyle could be grounds for immediate dismissal, which was tantamount to a death sentence. The position of female servants was particularly vulnerable, as their reputation was their only capital, and any rumors, even groundless ones, could ruin their future. The status of an unmarried maid who lost her job due to gossip or the wrath of her mistress made her almost an outcast in society, and finding a new good position became virtually impossible. Loneliness and separation from their families exacerbated the situation, as servants lived in their small, cold rooms in attics or basements, feeling trapped in this luxurious but alien world. Thus, the life of a servant was a constant act of walking on thin ice, where one wrong step could lead to disaster. They were doomed to a quiet, invisible tragedy that no one wanted to notice behind the glitter of Victorian silver and the light of ballroom chandeliers. We would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about how constant humiliation affected the servants' mental health? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Want to know the main secret of how employers controlled their servants? The employers' quick temper and unpredictable anger were not just personal flaws, but an effective tool of social control that kept the servants in constant tension and submission. Spoiled by power and luxury, masters often viewed their staff as objects on which to vent their bad moods, stress, or dissatisfaction with their own lives. Sometimes anger could arise from something completely insignificant: a dish served incorrectly, a stain on the floor, a squeaky door, or even because a servant simply happened to be in sight at the wrong moment. Such sudden and unmotivated anger was worse than any systematic supervision, as it was completely unpredictable and defied all logic. Servants never knew what mood their master would wake up in today, and what exactly would be the last straw that would break his patience and result in dismissal. This constant expectation of a blow that could come from anywhere created chronic stress that literally sucked the life out of them. In those days, dismissing a servant required no explanation, legal proceedings, or lengthy procedures, as the master was the absolute monarch in his own home. A servant could be dismissed within minutes, immediately, without warning, and most importantly, without receiving a letter of recommendation, which was the key to finding the next job. It was the absence of such a letter, this kind of passport in the world of servants, that turned dismissal into a real disaster. A letter of recommendation was the only thing that confirmed a servant's professionalism and trustworthiness. Without it, a person was considered unfit and suspicious. Many employers, aware of this critical dependency, used the threat of withholding a letter of recommendation as a powerful lever to force servants to work even harder and endure any humiliation. Thus, even the slightest violation could result not only in the loss of a job, but in the destruction of their entire career and social life. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that many servants were from out of town, often had no relatives in the city, and lived in servants' quarters, and dismissal meant immediate eviction. They had neither the time nor the means to find accommodation and start looking for a new job in a decent manner. As a result, many dismissed servants found themselves on the street with literally one suitcase, often without money or hope of finding employment quickly. Thus, the atmosphere in the mansion was permeated with constant fear, where the most frightening sound was not a knock on the door, but the cry of an angry master. It was a system in which human fate and careers hung by a thread that could be cut by a single unmotivated word. But knowledge of the area was only half the battle. Ready to learn how constant fear affected the daily work of the servants and why they were afraid of even themselves? You've definitely never heard about this unique secret. Constant fear of an outburst of anger or unmotivated dismissal caused invisible but deep emotional damage that could be called the sickness of silence. It was not a physical ailment, but it destroyed the servant's psyche from within, turning them into automatons capable of carrying out orders, but devoid of their own will and emotions. The servants learned to suppress their feelings, mask their fatigue, and hide any signs of discontent, creating a mask of impassivity on their faces that rarely slipped, even in moments of solitude. They lived in a state of maximum alertness, where every sound, every rustle, and every step of their master was perceived as a potential threat, causing an immediate reaction and a surge of adrenaline. The servants developed a phenomenal sensitivity to their employers' moods, learning to read them by the expression in their eyes, the intonation of their voices, and even by how quickly they opened the door. This art of foresight and avoidance of anger was their main survival strategy. This constant need to be on the alert led to chronic sleep deprivation and nervous exhaustion. Even in their cold and uncomfortable rooms, they could not relax as their brains continued to replay the day's events, analyzing every word and action to avoid mistakes tomorrow. Many suffered from insomnia, headaches, and unexplained anxiety, which were a direct result of living under constant psychological pressure. The most frightening thing was that the servants were afraid of themselves, or more precisely, of their own involuntary reactions. The fear of an accidental mistake, such as dropping an object, creaking a door, or making a typo in a letter, was so strong that some developed obsessive-compulsive disorders and rituals to control their bodies and movements. They moved around the mansion almost silently, trying to blend into the background and become invisible to their master's eyes. The psychological pressure often manifested itself in physical symptoms, which at the time were not associated with nerves, but which were very common among servants. These could include digestive problems, chronic back and neck pain from constant tension, and strange neurological tics. The servant's body seemed to refuse to obey orders, but his spirit compelled him to continue working. Thus, the silent disease was the tragic price of the luxury of the age of splendor. It was an invisible scar that remained with a person for life, even if they found easier work. Please like this video. It is not only a request, but also a tribute to those invisible people who paid the highest price. What you are about to learn will change your perception of the position of servants. For a servant, reputation and an impeccable past were the only guarantee of a future. Every entry in their employment record book, every letter of recommendation, every praise from a previous employer, all of this was part of the capital they had accumulated over the years. That is why instant dismissal at the whim of the employer, accompanied by a refusal to provide a reference, had consequences comparable to complete social and professional ruin. Dismissal without a recommendation meant that a person became untrustworthy, or even worse, dishonest. Other families, when hiring staff, always required letters of recommendation, and the absence of such a document immediately closed the doors to the best houses. A servant who was unable to prove his integrity could only count on the lowest paid, black market work, often with worse working conditions and more despotic employers. For female servants, the situation was even more dramatic. In addition to professional problems, she was branded with moral dishonesty, which could prevent her from getting married in the future or simply living a full life. The society of that time was very cruel to those who had tarnished their reputation in any way, and rumors of a maid's bad behavior spread like wildfire. Magnates and aristocrats often exchanged information about their servants, creating a kind of blacklist of undesirable employees. Even if a servant was dismissed for a trifling matter, information about this misconduct could be passed on between families. This meant that, having been dismissed from one mansion, a person could find themselves undesirable in all of high society. In a situation where servants had no legal rights or unions, they were completely defenseless against arbitrariness. No court would hear a case of unfair dismissal or refusal to provide a reference. The word of an all-powerful master was enough to ruin a person's life, and no one could argue with him. Thus, for servants, the risk of dismissal was not just an economic problem, but a threat of complete destruction of their entire social identity. This is what made them so submissive and fearful of their master's every move. How do you think servants coped with the consequences of such humiliating dismissals? Life in a mansion full of luxury and glamour was a kind of theater for the servants, where they were forced to play the role of perfect, soulless performers. This required constant tension to avoid the slightest mistake that could disrupt the perfect picture of wealth and order. The atmosphere was electrified with unspoken fear and hidden tension that could be felt in every hallway, every room, and every staircase. Strict rules demanded the almost impossible from the servants: to be everywhere but invisible, to anticipate desires but not take initiative, and to always look impeccable, even after hours of exhausting work. For example, a footman had to stand completely still for long hours, waiting for orders, and a maid had to remember the location of all 10,000 items in the house in order to instantly find what the master required. This need to live in a state of absolute attention was exhausting. Any public display of anger by the master, even if it was not directed at a specific servant, but at the atmosphere in general, instantly spread throughout the house. Rumors of the master or mistress's bad mood circulated among the staff at the speed of light, causing everyone to cower in anticipation of possible punishment. Everyone suddenly began to work even more quietly, even faster, and even more carefully, trying to avoid encountering the angry master. In large mansions where the servants were divided into upper and lower hierarchies, the tension was further intensified by internal conflicts and envy. Senior servants, such as the butler or housekeeper, were personally responsible for the misdemeanors of their subordinates. They were often even more demanding and harsh than their masters, as their own reputation depended on the impeccable work of their team. Housekeepers and butlers often used their employer's anger as a tool to manipulate and strengthen their own power over their subordinates. They might deliberately exaggerate a junior servant's misdemeanor in order to curry favor with their employers or eliminate a rival. This internal struggle for survival and status made life in the servants' quarters as unbearable as life in the public eye. Constant monitoring by senior staff was another source of stress. The housekeeper could unexpectedly check the maid's cupboards, looking for signs of disorder or personal unauthorized items. The butler might suddenly inspect the silverware or the wine cellar. No one could feel safe or relaxed for even a moment. What if I showed you a time machine? Imagine yourself in a huge dining room where the slightest mistake in the ritual of table service could cause a catastrophe. The Victorian era and the Gilded Age were times of incredibly complex and rigid social rituals, especially regarding meals and social events. For servants, these rituals were not just rules, but a minefield where every detail mattered. The price of a mistake in this world was not just a reprimand, but potential dismissal. The masters demanded absolute, almost machine-like precision. A footman serving wine had to remember which glass to pour into, the order in which to serve the guests, and which hand to use to hand them their napkins. A maid cleaning the boudoir had to know where the mistress's personal belongings were kept and never change their places. Violation of any of these unspoken rules was considered incompetence, and worst of all, potential curiosity about the master's affairs. The entire life of the servants was subject to invisible schedules and rituals that required them to perform the same actions at the same time, day after day. Violating this order, even due to illness or fatigue, was unforgivable. For example, if the butler was a minute late lighting the candles in the living room before the guests arrived, it could provoke the master's anger. Particular attention was paid to the work of the cook and assistants in the kitchen. Cooking in wealthy homes was an art, and any mistake in the preparation of dishes, from oversalted soup to overcooked meat, could cause an outburst of indignation. The cook was fully responsible for the quality of the food, and even if the mistake was made by her assistants, she was the one who was accountable to the mistress. The most dangerous moments were when there were guests in the house. Dinner parties and balls were the most stressful times for the servants, as they had to work quickly but quietly, be invisible but always ready for action. A mistake in front of guests was not just a mistake, but a public disgrace for the host. And of course, this disgrace was taken out on the servants. For example, if a footman accidentally spilled wine on a guest dress or dropped an expensive glass, it could result in immediate dismissal. The host, trying to save face in front of the guests, could publicly humiliate the servant or even force him to apologize, even though this was strictly forbidden by etiquette. This public humiliation was another tool of pressure. This world of broken rituals and unbearable precision was a constant source of fear. A servant's life was a continuous test that could be failed at any moment. In the next chapter, we will discuss how fear affected their health and why many of them did not live to old age. Constant physical exertion, irregular working hours, and minimal rest time led to chronic physical exhaustion, which slowly destroyed the health of the servants. They worked 16-18 hours a day, often with only short breaks for quick meals, and their bodies were constantly in motion. It was physical labor that did not stop until their employers went to bed and resumed while they were still asleep. The work of maids was particularly hard, as they had to lift heavy buckets of water and coal, climb steep stairs to attics, and clean huge rooms filled with furniture. They often developed chronic pain in their backs, joints, and legs, which they were forced to hide for fear of being declared unfit for work. Even the simplest cold could turn into a long illness, as their weakened bodies could not resist infection. Male servants, such as footmen and valets, also faced physical challenges. They had to be on their feet constantly, moving quickly around the house and carrying heavy trays of food and drinks. Their work required not only strength but also stamina, which had to be maintained despite poor and irregular nutrition. The servants' food was simple, often consisting of leftovers from their master's table or the cheapest food, which were bought in small quantities. The lack of vitamins and nutrients in their diet made them even more vulnerable to disease. Unlike their employers, who could afford the best doctors and medicines, servants were often treated with folk remedies or simply endured the pain. As a result, many servants did not live to old age or spend it in complete poverty with their health ruined. Their bodies were worn out to the limit, and their savings were often not enough even for the most modest existence. Their quiet suffering was part of the invisible price of the luxurious life of high society. For servants, there was no such thing as personal space or privacy. They were constantly under surveillance, and their lives were an open book to their employers and senior staff. This constant violation of personal boundaries was one of the most difficult aspects of their existence. Employers often felt entitled to interfere in the personal lives of their servants, controlling their acquaintances, correspondence, and even their appearance during their free time. They could forbid servants from meeting certain people or entering into romantic relationships if they believed it could compromise the household. Love and personal happiness were luxuries not meant for servants. One of the most humiliating aspects was that their rooms could be subjected to sudden searches. Senior staff, most often the housekeeper, regularly checked the maid's belongings for signs of theft, prohibited items, or simply disorder. This inspection was not only about control, but also about demonstrating authority. Any display of personal life or individuality that did not fit the image of the ideal servant was immediately suppressed. For example, if a maid wore too bright a ribbon in her hair, or a footman was interested in politics, it could cause anger. Servants had to be faceless and apolitical. In addition, servants were often the subject of tactless questions or comments from their employers. They could be asked about their personal affairs, have their appearance or education commented on, and be treated in a humiliating, dismissive manner. They had to answer these questions submissively, without showing any dissatisfaction. The relationship between employers and servants was based on total injustice and the defenselessness of the latter against arbitrariness. The legal system of the time offered virtually no protection to servants, leaving them at the mercy of their employers. A servant was a completely powerless being within the walls of a mansion. Any accusation against a servant, even the most absurd, was automatically considered true if it came from the master. If something of value went missing, the staff were the first to be suspected. Servants could be subjected to humiliating interrogation or even search without any grounds. In the event of a conflict or accusation, a servant had no right to a lawyer or a fair trial. They could simply be fired and thrown out onto the street, and no one would investigate the real reasons. This created ideal conditions for abuse of power. The threat of denunciation or slander by senior staff was constant. Butlers and housekeepers, eager to keep their positions, often reported the slightest misdemeanors of junior servants to their employers, sometimes even inventing them. Anyone who was disliked by senior staff could become a victim of such slander. Even if a servant managed to prove his innocence, this rarely saved him from dismissal. The fact that a servant aroused suspicion and created an unpleasant situation was reason enough to get rid of him. The masters valued peace and order above justice. Servants also had no social security. There were no pensions, unemployment benefits, or health insurance. If a servant became too old, sick, or unfit for work, they were simply dismissed, leaving them without a means of subsistence. Ultimately, the anger and arbitrariness of their masters turned the potentially successful lives of servants into a series of broken destinies and unfulfilled hopes. Many of them came to the mansion with ambitions and dreams of a better life, hoping that working in a wealthy household would give them the opportunity to save money, get an education, or find a suitable partner. However, the reality was often much harsher. The work was so exhausting and time-consuming that the servants simply had no energy or time left for personal development or education. The chances of promotion were slim, as the highest positions were held only by the most experienced and trusted people. Most remained in their lower positions until they were replaced by younger and stronger workers. Many female servants postponed marriage and childbirth, as a married maid with children was a burden on the household. If they did marry, it was often to other servants or laborers, and their lives continued in the same cycle of hard labor and poverty. Unfulfilled hopes for a better life were part of their daily tragedy. Those who were dismissed with a bad reference often found it impossible to recover. They could not find decent work, their reputation was tarnished, and they were forced to eke out a miserable existence in the city slums. For them, a moment of anger on the part of their employer was a death sentence. We conclude our dive into the world of invisible tragedies hidden behind the glitz and glamour of the Gilded Age. The history of domestic servants is a stark reminder that wealth is often built on fear, humiliation, and complete indifference to human cost. The quick temper of the masters was not just a character trait, but a deadly weapon capable of destroying a person's life in an instant. depriving them of their reputation, work, and hope for the future? Which of the stories about the fate of servants, about the constant fear of dismissal or total control of their personal lives, did you find most tragic? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes about the hidden sides of history